Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
There's a form of workaholism going on. There's a form of denial. There's a form of numbing, because at the end of the day, who am I if I cannot say I am on Wall Street, or I am this, or I am that? There is a form of identification to the job that is very unhealthy. And I think this is really one of the big things about finance and about New York City, or even all of these very grandiose, grandiloquent jobs, is that they are so socially pleasing that it's very difficult to let go of that identity. We have the impression there's nothing else. We can't do anything else. So we cling to it. It becomes us. So it's not only an external pressure, but it's a self-inflicted pressure as well, to be there, to do more, to never enough, to always comparing to others. And then comes a point where, we can ignore the pain in the body, we can ignore the burnout, we can be driven by fear. But as the word burnout suggests, once you have burned the candle by the two sides, as they say in French, there isn't much else left to carry you, outside of your bed. Let's start by finding what brings us joy, what brings us a form of fulfillment, what brings us a form of, I like where I am right now. So not everything is going to be likable or enjoyable, but there are things that make you feel good about yourself. So start by that. And the second part is, very quickly, you will start seeing a pattern in what actually makes you feel achieved, or what makes you feel happy.
Today's interview with Mayda Poc is one of the most engaging and interesting conversations I've had about work, life, identity, and finding our purposes. From Wall Street to international life and career coach for executives in fast-paced industries, after more than 16 years in the financial industry in Paris, London, and New York City, in years of ignoring serious health concerns culminating in cancer, Mayda Poc left investment, but not first without a fight. After all, for Mayda, like so many of us, what we do is who we are. But through her journey out of finance and stress and burnout is one of hope, grounded in real work and real depth. She became an international life and career coach, focusing on helping executives find more zen, fulfillment, and purpose in their lives and careers. And as your typical overachiever, Mayda holds multiple certifications and accreditations: life coaching, career and corporate, as well as a health coach. She's a certified hypnotist, and she uses neuro-linguistic programming as well as emotional freedom technique. And I can tell you she also uses Reiki, because I'm going to be taking some Reiki classes from her soon. Mayda speaks 4 languages, having spent part of her childhood in Syria, then in France. She now resides in New York City with her husband, and where she actually lives. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Thanks for joining in. Welcome, everybody. This is Melissa with the Fully Mindful podcast, and I'm very excited to have today with us a real treat of a person who offers a really interesting perspective, both personally and professionally. Her name is Mayda Poc. She started off on Wall Street and her way to an international life and career coach for executives in fast-paced industries. So she helps a lot of us. After more than 16 years in the financial industry in Paris, London, and New York City, yes, she's that cool, and a quote unquote life happens event, which we'll get into a little bit here, Mayda left in investment banking to become an international life and career coach, focusing on helping executives find more Zen, fulfillment, and purpose in their lives. She's speaking my language. As your typical overachiever, and we relate on this in so many ways, Mayda holds multiple certifications and accreditations in life coaching, career, and corporate, as well as a health coach. She's a certified hypnotist, and she uses neuro-linguistic programming, as well as one of my favorites, emotional freedom technique, in her practice. She speaks, again, I mentioned she's an overachiever, 4 languages, having spent part of her childhood in Syria and then in France. She now resides in New York City with her husband. And so welcome, Mayda. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the cool introduction as well.
Yeah.
It was nicely put. Very nicely presented.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, you have quite a story that I think people would be interested in, particularly those listeners who, might be having identified with a struggle of maybe being overworked or burnt out or questioning what they want to do in their career or in their lives. Tell us a little bit about your story. Where did you get to the point where you were at the jumping off place, so to speak?
Oh, that point happened so many times in my career. I used to joke that I am a serial resigner because it's about every year I would be like, I'm done, I'm it. And I think that finance and law offices as well, there is this push to stay because we have been programmed to do that. And definitely my upbringing, I come from a family of immigrants. There is always this background that I need to prove that I'm worth the investment in me. I need to prove myself all the time. And this, that I'm sure you relate to, and a lot of people can relate to, ends up being very exhausting. So it's not only an external pressure, but it's a self-inflicted pressure as well, to be there, to do more, to never enough, to always comparing to others. And then comes a point where, we can ignore the pain in the body, we can ignore the burnout, we can be driven by fear. But as the word burnout suggests, once you have burned the candle by the 2 sides, as they say in French, there isn't much else left to carry you, outside of your bed. And in my case, it was cancer, which I blissfully ignored for 2 years.
You ignored your cancer?
Oh yeah, I couldn't breathe. I just didn't know why I wasn't breathing. And then came a time where I actually collapsed on the street. Because literally I couldn't breathe. And that point, it's like, okay, maybe I should go and see a doctor. Maybe it's a good idea. And then from there was a lot of soul searching. What could that be? And because they didn't identify it as such in the beginning. And then the final diagnosis, which was an advanced cancer, a lymphoma. And me being on the other side of the statistics, which was very interesting for me to go through at that time. Like, you have 20% of survival. Okay. But
wow.
You go through it.
And so, I mean, let's get to that point where you were at a place where you would ignore some pretty significant physical symptoms, right? You're not breathing well to the point where you collapse on the street. So take us back a little bit. You mentioned you were an immigrant, and you mentioned that you were in finance. So what kind of jobs were you having to prove yourself that you were worth all the things, all the investments that people had put in you, that you were worth having gone to school for, that you were worth all of that you were trying to prove? Where were you working? Like, what's your trajectory?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions we'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful for your transformative session today.
So when I was in France, I did one of these big Grande École, which is the equivalent of an Ivy League here. And at the end of that, I really had no idea what to do. And to this day, I'm still wondering how I ended up in finance. It wasn't something that I planned. I admire people who know from early on, I want to be a doctor, I want to be this. I had no idea. But when you do these big business schools, this is some sort of path of least resistance, or maybe a lazy path. I don't know yet, maybe a bit of both. But it so happened that it led me to finance, it led me on trading floors. And from there in London, where I worked in derivatives, it was a bit intellectually challenging because it's a lot of math and it's a lot of men as well at the same time, but it was more or less okay. And then in the US, I became head of equity syndicate and my job for the Americas. And my job was to can I carry all the IPOs, all the equity offerings that we as a bank were involved globally in and sell them into the US. So it was one of those multi-drawer type of jobs where my job was to talk to all sorts of people internally, externally, to make sure that there is no slip ups because it's very sensitive as non-public information that I had. And I was working with people who were on the public side. There was a lot of nation with my team in Hong Kong, so 12, 13 hours ahead or not. So my job was to wake up at 4 in.the morning and to go to bed at 9 to make sure that I am perfectly coordinated with my other teams who are in Hong Kong and London. So it was, for me, there were several things. Number one, if I slip up, if I let anything fall through the cracks, it's going to be very costly to my team and to my bank because it's not only a money issue, which is huge. This is finance, not charity. And at the same time, there is a reputational risk. Nobody wants to end up on the newspapers, with their emails or this bank forgot to disclose this and that. So there was a lot of that. Banks together are very competitive as well. And there is an overwhelming push to do more and more and better and more all the time. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's this external push. There's no, I sit all day and let things happen because it's not possible. But at the same time, there's this feeling inside, and I'm going to call that an overachiever feeling inside of I'm not a quitter. And there's a deep sense of honor that I will produce the best job possible that I can. And fortunately, in these businesses, you can be the best of anything you want. You will always be asked to do more. And this is when, in these businesses in particular, it's very difficult to say no and to say, I have been working 48 hours. I really need to sleep. Well, there's a client on the other side, and the client is paying you millions, and the bank is counting on this money, and your team is counting on this money. So there is a form of disproportionate sense of responsibility when you are in these jobs at any level, to be honest, that is absolutely not commensurate with the kind of money that you get back or the kind of validation that you get back. Some people get very well paid, but most people work very, very hard and very long hours, not necessarily being paid the millions that you hear about, on TV.
Right. And maybe even if they were, it wouldn't necessarily be worth the incredible amount of pressure and stress that it puts on a person, at least for the long term. I mean, even in the short term, what you're describing sounds overwhelming. It sounds unsustainable. And yet here you were, and thousands of other people like you around the world on this crazy, never-ending hamster wheel with incredible amounts of pressure. And your reward for doing a good job is to ask you to do more and have the expectation of doing more and more and more. And then it sounds like you, and I certainly can relate because I've had similar jobs where we internalize that. And there is that pressure of, I want to do the best. I want to be there. I want to be the one, not for necessarily some ego driven, although that can certainly be part of it, but not necessarily for some ego driven result, but because you just genuinely want to do good work, right? And you want to perform well and you want to do the right thing. And then, of course, there's also the fear of, like you said, you don't want to be on the cover of the New York Times or the Washington Post, right? As being the one who is responsible for disclosing confidential information or whatever it was. So, I mean, here you are on this incredible treadmill, hamster wheel, whatever we want to call it. And I'm going to take a big guess here that you're not really taking care of yourself in the other way. You're taking care of your work self, you're getting things done, you're doing all the good work. But I'm wagering that you're not maybe taking care of the other parts of yourself. Was that true?
Oh, it's very true. It's, for me, the other parts of myself were annoyance. When I got diagnosed with cancer and knowing that I had to go through chemotherapy, which for Hodgkin's lymphoma at that time, it's changing. And it wasn't that long ago. It was less than 10 years ago, but at that time was still pretty intensive. My first reaction was, I cannot do that. I have deals in the market. I absolutely cannot do that. And my reaction was, okay, so what I will do, as I negotiated with my doctor, is that I will stop working the day I'm receiving the chemo, because believe it or not, you can't really do your emails when you have stuff going through your veins. It's not advisable.
Yeah.
But needing to say that there is a form of workaholism going on. There's a form of denial. There is a form of numbing, because at the end of the day, who am I if I cannot say I am on Wall Street, or I am this, or I am that? There is a form of identification to the job that is very unhealthy. And I think this is really one of the big things about finance and about New York City, or even all of these very grandiose, grandiloquent jobs, is that they are so socially pleasing that it's very difficult to let go of that identity. We have the impression there's nothing else. We can't do anything else. So we cling to it. It becomes us.
Well, and culturally, it does seem in Western cultures that not only is that identity so important, but there's this putting up on the pedestal of that overwork, right? Like, oh, I'm so busy. Oh, I know. Yeah, me too. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe. And I had somebody call me at 2 a.m. Oh yeah, I know. And like, you're given kudos for being overworked, right? You're given these rewards for being overworked, completely burnout and tired, and at the expense of your family, perhaps, or friendships, and your own self-care. But we hold this up as like, I mean, I don't know what it's like in France, but I imagine in Paris and London in these circles, as well as obviously the United States, that's very much the case, right? Where you were being probably told like, wow, Mayda, you're doing so amazing. And I know you have so much going on, and that's like amazing that you're able to, it's almost like you're a martyr, right? Like you're so amazing that you're able to get all of this done and still function in life.
Absolutely. My boss used to call me the machine, and I used to think it was very flattering at that time. Now I look at maybe not. It's exactly that. I do recall when my husband and we arrived to New York, and people would say, "What are you doing this weekend?" And it was nothing. And what? What you're doing? Nothing. We're not doing anything. We're just enjoying the weekend. We have a free weekend. We're enjoying it. There is this, it's almost like a fear of having nothing to do, of being alone, or of having to sit in silence. So what's going to happen if I have nothing to do? I'm going to get bored, and then what? There's a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's almost like and I don't know what that's about, and it would be interesting to look into that further, but that really deep fear that we have in this culture of being bored. Like we think we're going to die or something if we don't have anything to do, or we no longer matter, maybe is part of it as well. And so that's fascinating that you notice that immediately. When you moved to New York, what are you doing? Nothing. What?
Exactly. And I think somehow when I think about it, I grew up in the Middle East where there is a sense of community, and even in France there is a sense of community. But when you move from France to come to the UK or to the US, you're not part of a community anymore because you're transplanted in a way. So I feel as well that there is a sort of identification with wanting to pertain or wanting to be accepted, not being rejected. So there is this tendency to want to do everything like the other people do it as well. So if around me everybody in New York is crazy busy, then I need to act crazy busy because otherwise it doesn't work. Otherwise I'm completely not in sync with what's happening in life. So as you said, maybe I'm dead, maybe I'm not relevant anymore. I cannot go into that rat race like like everybody else.
It's like this thing, I need to be like everybody else, only better. Right?
Yes.
How do you ever live up to that? Right? And so, kind of going back to your story, so here you are negotiating, and I love that you use that term, you're negotiating with your doctor. Here, they've given you a 20% chance of survival, and you're negotiating with your doctor because you have deals on the table that you've got to work. And you're only taking one day off, the day that you're getting chemo. And for anyone who hasn't had chemo or hasn't known someone who's had chemo, that's crazy. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
just
Oh
taking
yeah.
a day off
Yeah.
because you're obliterated days after the chemo that as it works through your system, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And I did ask to have steroids just to be able to cope. So it was very interesting because in one way you realize how unbelievably resilient the body is. It can cope with everything. And at the same time, years later, and this came up in therapy because I needed to go to therapy at some point, as in this is not okay, this is not healthy. And realizing that I I lacked the basic compassion and the basic understanding to my body, to my health, to my soul, to my person, in the sense where I was, as you said, on that wheel, and I really was fighting to stay on it, whereas everything around me was screaming, "Get off of it," because it's not healthy, it's not for you. But habits, but who am I if I'm not Wall Street? Who am I? I have no idea.
Right. And so here you are faced with this diagnosis and this treatment, and you're still on this hedonic treadmill, and you're still, but now questioning, who am I if I'm not this person? But it's not at that point that you make a radical change, right?
No, oh no, that would be too easy. That
Yeah.
would be too easy. That would be so obvious. No, I am not doing anything obvious. I have to complicate things. I have to overcomplicate things. It's so much more interesting. It took me a year to get there. And it took me a year because I have to say that having cancer was actually something very interesting for me. It was for the first time since I was a kid that I was really in the flow of things, where I take it as it comes. There were some pretty nasty days, and there were some days where all was well. It's as if I had nothing, and I was just going through them equally. The days that were bad, okay, I'm not feeling well, but I can still achieve. The days that were good, I was like, it's gone, it's all good. So there was a lot of not necessarily pushing myself, but just allowing myself to do what I had to do and taking a bit of pressure off of me as well. As in, there is a conference call at 6 in the morning. I really cannot do it. So I didn't do it. So there was a little bit of relaxing and giving myself some slack. What happened is that I realized with time, though, that my body was not as coping or as resilient as it used to be. And it was really one day, a year and a half later, where I had this very complicated transaction to deal with. I was pretty miserable, which was my normal state. So it wasn't really much different. But this time I was really getting very upset with about everything. The difference is that in the past, I would get angry, I would get upset, I would curse around everything and everyone, my cat, my husband, obvious. And then they will they will get over it, and I will get over it, and the deal is done, and then the next one. Except that this time there was a strong feeling inside of me that said, you need to stop this, because if you continue like this, the next cancer is not going to be as pleasant. So I personally think I was really very lucky. I really did very well. It was very fast. I actually had 2 cancers at the same time. They were all gone. So I really was lucky. I had a very good doctor. I didn't have too many side effects. It was all good. But the feeling inside of me was so overwhelming. I really literally had never felt it that way. It was a form of mini panic attack, as in it's all or nothing now, or no more choice, no more no more waiting for the next bonus until I resign. It's now or never.
Wow. Yeah. So you did, right? You
I
did
did.
that. It's now, not never.
It was too much. It was too strong for me to not listen this time. I have ignored for years, but this time it was really a cry from so much deep inside of me. It would have been almost foolish not to listen.
Yeah. So what did you do? Did you literally quit right there on the spot?
I went to see my husband and I said, listen, can we survive without a second income? And he's like, you do what you have to do. House first, the rest we'll figure out. And the next morning I went to see my manager and I said, I'm leaving. So he burst out laughing, because I do this every few months.
Right.
And I said, no, this time is for real. And I said, please don't give me more, because every time I would receive something that would sweeten the deal for me and I would be staying. And I said, please don't try this time. And he's like, okay, this time I can understand. I respect that. And so 3 months later, just to, make sure, 2 months later, just to make sure everything was wrapped up and I was leaving in good terms, I left. And
Wow.
that was the beginning of the big unknown.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that feel to walk out the door or to get off the last call or however it was that you ended it? How did that feel to not have a plan, to not know what was next?
It was atrocious. It was so distressing for me, who knew in advance what we were going to do in the months, 2 months, 3 months, although there will be a lot of unknown and surprises and what have you. It was part of the job, but I had an idea that from next after this transaction there will be something else, and then holidays. There was a path
Mm.
that was easy to predict, and this time there was nothing. And that feeling of what am I going to do, I went through it, and it was pretty violent, I have to say, because like I have strictly no idea what I want to do, but do I even want to do anything? And so there was this huge sort of inner conflict between part of my brain, who at between 3 to 6 months was very happy not to do anything but wanted to do something, and the other part of my brain was like, oh my goodness, it's terrible, you can't stay without a job, what will people think of you? And I have to say, it's pretty interesting what we put ourselves through when we're bored or we don't have a sense of purpose.
Yes. I mean, I think that's really interesting that you experienced it as almost like two people, right? The one that settled in and relaxed into it and was okay with it. And then the other side of you saying, this is too uncomfortable. You need to be doing something. You have to have a plan. You need to go. And, that conflict there. And so how did it resolve for you? What did you decide, or how did you figure out what your next step was? Or did you just relax into the not doing this?
So at the beginning, I was really stressing out because I strictly had no idea what I can do. And then at some point, there was a discussion there, and someone would say, well, have you checked? There is a holistic nutrition school. You've always been interested. Have you checked it? And it's online, which is very good for me. Like, oh, let me go into that. So I started doing this. And while I was doing this, something else appeared, and a third thing appeared, and a fourth thing appeared. And as I was doing all of those, all of a sudden I needed to train on other humans. So I I started doing coaching on other people, which was very stressful for me because, again, I have no idea what I was doing. And all of a sudden, this person liked so much what we did together, she insisted on paying me. And all of a sudden, it was my first paying client. And I think it's a bit part of this going with the flow type of situation, a bit like during cancer as well, where it's not about sitting and waiting for things to happen, but it's about having conversations, and then slowly but surely new things are going to be coming your way. And so you seed, you have some responses, you make decisions, and then you go to the next step, and things start to unravel in a way. And this is how, at the end, I had all of these certifications. It was mostly because I was scared, as in, I don't think I know enough. I don't think I have enough. But now I realize probably I wouldn't need all of that, but I'm actually quite happy I did it as well.
Right. Well, I mean, it's that classic kind of imposterism that I think so many high achieving people suffer from. And certainly you have a number of factors for that, right? You're an immigrant a couple of times over, right? From, Syria to Europe to the United States. And then you are this high achieving Wall Street woman in finance. And so you're accustomed to people having long pedigree of achievements. And so when you go into this different field, I'm sure you're thinking, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to have all of these certificates, right? And I mean, I certainly relate with that, right? I'm always getting a certificate or doing another course. And there's one thing about, wanting to learn and learn new things, but it's another thing altogether when you think you need to do the thing in order to be credible or to know what you're doing. And I love that you did it anyway, and that you found the value in the coaching and the different type of coaching that you were doing, and that you just sort of not stumbled on it. I mean, obviously you were very intentional, but you weren't sure how it was going to unfold. And I love how you described it as being, I think, really mindful of, oh, well, I'm here right now, and then here are my choices down this path. And oh, I get to a different juncture in the path, and now I get to make these decisions. Instead of the usual just being reactive, right? Which is what we do in this culture. We just react and we just, oh, what do I need to do now? And we're not really intentional and really considering, what do I want to do next? What is next for me? And I love how you arrived at that and you allowed that to unfold. So you get your first client, paying client, and you're like, oh my gosh, maybe this is real, right?
Yes. And then comes the pressure, because all of a sudden, now I'm getting paid to do something which was cool as a leisure hobby thing. But all of a sudden I realize, oh, gee, now it's a job. But this is where these trainings, but I'm also going to say this kind of personal adventure that I took becomes very useful. It's when I stopped and asked myself, what I'm doing, or these decisions that I'm making, are they mostly out of fear? Or are they mostly out of self-respect, or because I'm building something that feels good for myself? So, of course, certain decisions will be out of fear because we're still humans and we still live in environments that, are pretty intense. But I also know that when we stop for a second and when we really truly ask ourselves, from where am I making these decisions? Then our decisions become smoother. They become more congruent with what we want really deep inside. And even though at some point you can look back and say, oh, I wish I didn't do that. But in reality, you see benefits in hindsight. I find that, at least for me, but also with the people that I work with, when I make peace with the decisions that I'm making, things go smoother. There is less friction, there is less pain, there is less of this pushing, and there's more of, okay, I do my best, I make all the decisions. Is there anything more I can do? And most of the time, there's always one thing, but is it really worth it? And we let go, and then things start to unfold in a very gentle, and I'm going to call that even feminine way as well.
I love that. And maybe that's what you are doing with this coaching, these all these high achieving people who are dissatisfied with some aspect of their lives or their work or both. And you're helping them to find that. I think you've called it Zen, this centeredness in themselves where they can make the right decision, whatever that decision is. And you help them to uncover that in themselves. And I love that you do that. And I guess I want to talk about that because we're in a world right now where post-pandemic, or I don't know, are we post-pandemic? I guess. And one's talking about, and has been for a while, about the quote unquote great resignation or the great reshuffling or the great whatever it is that we want to call it that happened, as well as, this crazy amount of burnout that people seem to have, as well as this new term that people are using, this quiet quitting. And as somebody who's on the firing lines, because you're working with people who are in these fields, is that your experience that you're seeing that there's been this increase of questioning of, wait, what am I doing? Why am I here? Why is this like this? Does it need to be like this? Can I change it? If so, how? Hey, everybody. If you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think there's a lot of asking yourself the question as the beginning of the path. Simply because, again, a lot of the people that I work with, they went to these big schools. It cost them money, it cost their parents money. Some of them are immigrants as well. So there is a lot of push from the community and your parents to do good, to be the first person in your family to work in San Francisco, to work in a big bank, in a big private equity, whatever it is. So there's a lot of pressure as well to not quit. That is all fine and good, but there's also a pressure on the inside, as in, why am I doing this exactly? What is going on? And part of the work that we do together is not necessarily to have people quit and become entrepreneurs. Some people want to do that, but not everybody can afford to do that. It's not that simple. But the big part of the job that we do together, of the work we do together, is to recenter into the person, into what they want inside. And if they want to stay in these fast and furious places, it's all good, but do it for yourself. Do it because it helps you expand. Do it because it helps you probably accelerate your growth outside your comfort zone. Because maybe for one of the persons that I work with has a very, very difficult relationship with her boss, for example. And one of the reasons why she is staying for the moment, of course, we're working on getting her out of it, but one of the reasons why she's staying is that once you have become a bit more comfortable with that discomfort of being in a permanent conflict with someone, you have learned a lot about yourself. You have learned a lot about how to deal with difficult people. And most times, the job where you are is the perfect place to do that, until obviously it's toxic, until you're really at the end of the burnout, and then it's really a good time to start thinking about leaving. I find that habit is one of the reasons why people don't leave, because I call that the game. I personally call that the game, the finance game, because you're permanently, completely detained or enmeshed with the bonus, because your salary is one thing, but the bonus is much more important. So there's that game that happens where you really, really, really want to leave, and it's June, but then, okay, there's the holidays, the summertime, you stay, and then comes September, and the bonus is going to be in January or in December, so you stay. And then come January, and you're a bit hangover from all the food and whatever, and then the new holidays and what have you. So people end up like me, staying 16 years that way. And I think this is where the working on yourself and recentering everything around what you want. And again, it could be quitting, it could be not quitting, it could be staying where you are, but on different terms, is a very individual choice. And it's not like a wave, it's not like a hashtag thing. It's more a deep desire for building a better future for yourself and for your families. So silent quitting is a bit different for me, because I work with lawyers, with people in finance. You don't silent quit in these places. You are 100% dependent on your deliverables and your results. And if you don't deliver, there are a ton of people at the door that are ready to take your job. So it's almost like a luxury. I'm not sure it's the right word, but it's almost like something that is not available for them. And this is where it's difficult.
I read this really interesting article recently about that. And so for those who are listening are like, wait, what's quiet quitting? If you haven't heard that, it's basically, it's not really quitting. It's just essentially doing not the bare minimum, but the job that you were hired to do, and not beyond the hours that you're hired to do that, and not beyond the minimal expectations. And so it is a bit of a luxury, right? Because there are so many expectations in many of these jobs that people could lose their job if they're not actually performing above and beyond. And like you said, there might be somebody standing at the door. I also was reading that it doesn't take into consideration the people who, have jobs that are, let's say, more blue collar job, and same thing. If they're being asked to do something by the boss, they can't tell them no, right? I mean, they could, but there will be consequences. And so it really is a bit of a luxury, but it is something that's in the toolbox for some people, right? Where that might be one thing that can be used by people who are in the situation where they can avail themselves of that quiet quitting in order to gain that centeredness that you're talking about. Okay, I'm fortunate enough to be in that situation. I'm going to stop answering my phone after 5:30 and on the weekends, and I will be 100% or more available during the normal work hours. But I'm going to take that time for myself to figure out what I want, what my values are, and where my next steps are. And I mean, more power to these people who do that. And I do wish that we lived in a culture that we didn't call it something like quiet quitting, when really it's about just doing your job and doing it well.
It's exactly that. I'm 100% with you here. I get a bit triggered by this qualification of quiet quitting, because at the end of the day, it feels like people are quitting on themselves. It's like, I'm quiet quitting, I'm just going to do what's within the job, I don't care what happened, but it feels almost selfish. But in reality, real quiet quitting are the people who you and I will work with, who are the people who are saying, I'm not quitting on anything. In reality, I'm detaching from this craziness that I have been embarking into, where all of a sudden I worked with people who literally give birth and go back the next day to work. And it's not because they love their job so much. The women will love their job so because they feel they don't have the choice. And this is insanity. And the idea is, okay, I call that the misplaced loyalty is, am I really getting from this job what I'm giving it? And if the answer is no, then let's sit, let's talk, spend some time in thinking, why are you so attached to this relationship that looks more abusive than nurturing and self-respecting? And then you get a sense of sovereignty. You get a sense of, but hold on 1 second. Okay, maybe they can fire me at any time if I give an opinion or something. We don't know, right? But maybe they have this power over me. But am I giving them a power that they shouldn't have? Am I letting them set the mood for my day? Am I letting them decide how and where I can be happy and not? And as we start detaching from this kind of outside validation, external validation, then we start leaning into a smoother relationship with a job. It becomes a job, it becomes a conduit for purpose, a conduit for having interactions with people, to have a paycheck, but it doesn't define who I am. And in particular, it doesn't decide what I am, what I'm not, what I should do, what I shouldn't. And then I put limits. And there are a lot of ways, even for people who are in finance, who have leadership jobs, there are ways for them to set boundaries. And of course, when you are in a position of leadership, it's very difficult to just close the phone and say, oh, there's a crisis, I don't care. And nobody is going to do that. But there are ways to put mental boundaries in particular, because for me, the burnout is not the second level of burnout is the physical burnout, but the first level starts as mental burnout. This is when we cannot detach from the job anymore. We cannot have a meal with friends or family or even on your own without going into solutions and crisis mode and what if. This is how we burn out. And this is a good place to quit this kind of mentality and go into it's not reasonable. This is obsession. If that job were a person, I'm sure my family and my friends will tell me that I'm out of my freaking mind. So these are the places where we all can gain from spending time and asking ourselves whether what we're doing is really that reasonable.
Right. Yes. I mean, I do like reframing it that way. Like if I talked about a person in this way and not a job, but like a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a friend or anybody, you would think maybe I need a stalking order against me or something, right? Like I'm clearly obsessed, but yet somehow when we're talking about work and we're obsessing on work, as we were talking about earlier, like that somehow that's acceptable. But obviously it's not, because it's burning the person out. And I love how you talk about quiet quitting, not so much as quiet quitting, but as detaching and reclaiming your power, right? I love how you turn that around of like, what am I doing to give away my power, my boundaries? What am I doing? And how can I reclaim that so that maybe I stay in the job, maybe I don't stay in the job, but at least I make a decision based on my own values and my own understanding, and I'm not just reacting to somebody else, and I'm not just giving up all of my power over to somebody else to make those decisions for me. Love that. So you said that you use a little bit of NLP sometimes where appropriate, or emotional freedom technique, for those who are wondering what those are. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use those and what those are?
Yes. It's part of reframing in reality. I think that sometimes we are so much in the habit of a lot of things that what the brain needs is a stop. And emotional freedom technique, which is called tapping as well, or even NLP, are one way to first to stop. The emotional tapping is we tap on certain meridian points that are very nodded in a way in the body, and that allow the body to communicate a sense of control and a sense of calmness to the rest of the body. NLP is one way of reframing. It's another way of, for me, is another way of showing the mind that there are other possibilities. As humans, we have this tendency to generalize. It's all or nothing. It's my way or the highway. It's everybody hates me. There are a lot of things a lot of assumptions that we base many of our decisions upon. But like any kind of mathematic formula, if the assumption is wrong, then the conclusion is definitely very wrong. And so NLP is one way of going back to these assumptions and just turning them around. Everybody hates me. Is that true? Is that everybody? Who and why and when? And all of a sudden the brain is like, okay, so maybe I'm in conflict with one person, but maybe I have a good reason to be in conflict with this person. So we use the power of the mind, that same power that make us sometimes miserable and completely depleted because, oh my goodness, and I'm a loser and I'm a quitter, blah, blah. We use that to exactly the opposite, to say, hold on one second, I'm human, I'm a normal person. I also have my feelings. I also have my boundaries, my preferences, and this is not okay. Or I have been basing a lot of my assumptions on things that actually are not real. So how can I change that? And this is what NLP does. It is reprogramming the brain to see things from almost like an observer point of view, rather than from the body, mind, soul that has been reacting to an external trigger, and the body keeping these kind of imprint and rehashing them every single time. It's quite close to EMDR, which is a therapy technique where it allows you to find the roots of how the body has associated several sensations and feelings and emotions to one root experience that I had in life. But actually, anytime that I have this emotion, my body goes back to that root and remind me of that kind of trauma in a way that happened in my life at some point. So there is this re-triggering. So NLP, without going into therapy, is a bit like that as well. It's about retelling the brain that one incident is not general, that there is excessive filtering in the brain, because that's what we do. And the truth is actually quite dependent on the way we view it. And our truth is not universal and is not the truth. So we need to get out of our own way and explore our zone of excellence rather than stay in our zone of fear, which some people call your comfort zone. I have my personal opinions about comfort zone, but we can stay there. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I know, I've certainly done my fair share of therapy and have benefited from it. But at one point, I think during one session, I said, I don't think this is really working anymore. And it was because my own thinking was trying to solve my own thinking problems. And, these neuro pathways were so well worn that I couldn't get out of them. I needed something else to pull me out of that so I could see them for what they were, which was just neuro pathways, just patterns of ways of thinking. And so something like I've done EMDR as well, and NLP and EFT, they are really excellent tools, especially for very left-brained people, which I think you're really working with, who are used to just being very analytical and linear and all that, and just not even participating in that part of the brain and just really getting over to the right side of the brain, or bridging those two sides and using something else so that you get out of those well-worn paths, those habits of thinking that are no longer serving us. And and sometimes we need that. And I know I've worked with people, and I even remember when I was working with a therapist and she brought up EMDR, she confessed that she was a little bit nervous about it because I am a lawyer and I'm so logical, and I kind of thought, well, that's funny that that's her perception of me, but also I can understand that. And so she's like, well, are you willing to try something different? And it was like, well, yeah, that's what I want. And it has amazing results, whether it's EMDR, EFT, or NLP. Not that those are the only tools, obviously. Any form of deep inquiry or mindfulness techniques can really help people. But I love that you have this in your toolbox that you can use on more difficult cases like me. Like I would be one of your more difficult cases, right?
It's not, I don't think it's difficult. I call people intellectualizer,
Mm.
is when we have been so primed to put everything in the brain, we forget that we have a body. And so we need to remind humans that we are a body first. The animal is a body, it exists without us. You can take the brain, you can put the brain on life support, whatever, the body will continue more or less living, right? Because we are primed to live. And so we need to involve the body in our decisions. We need to respect the body. If the body is revolting, as the body doesn't like a food, for example, there's no need to feed it more of it. So if the body is not reacting well to a certain stress that we're giving it, we need to pause, because that's how we create diseases. It's very simple. Unfortunately, not all diseases are self-created, but some of them come from stress and from prolonged exposure to this kind of mind looping that we go into, and EFT in particular is a good way to go back into the body, because it's telling the body, I understand you are storing a lot of emotions, so let's go through these emotions. I'm giving myself permission to feel, because in all of these places, finance and what have you, we don't have the right to feel. It's forbidden, especially women. I mean, even men, they cannot show anger. Some of them do because it's a habit, but for most of them, you cannot show anger, you cannot show frustration, you cannot. And so this is a place where you give yourself permission to feel, even if it's not a socially pleasing kind of emotion, but you allow the body to say, I'm not happy, or I'm stressed out, or I'm actually feel disrespected. And then you allow the body to express yourself via the brain, and all of a sudden they're working together and not against each other. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, that's such an amazing thing. And it's funny, I just did a meditation yesterday on the podcast about this very thing, about being in our bodies. And we spend so much time in between our ears. And in our culture, and so many cultures, we overvalue what's happening in our brains and in our minds. And we forget to pay attention to the body. And that's actually, like you said, where we feel first. That is where we get the sensory input, is from the body. And yet we divorce ourselves from it in this culture to such a degree that then we're confused when later on we have, let's say, a cancer diagnosis or something that, like you said, maybe wasn't caused by your thinking, but certainly laid the groundwork for it to be more amenable for a cancer to be present. And so, we're confused by it, like, why does this happen? And it's like, well, when you look back, well, I was so unhappy and I was stressed out and burned out, and I just made myself go, 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 go for 16 years or whatever it is. And then suddenly it's like, oh, so the goal then is, how do we get to the point where we do marry the body and the mind and the spirit without having to endure some catastrophic diagnosis or event, right? And how do we in our everyday lives become more present and aware of and intentional and in alignment with our own values and vision and goals, so that we don't end up there? So I'm sure you have an answer for that.
I have so many answers. I don't know how practical all of it is, but I'm going to start by saying that I think one of the ways is to understand what you are here to do on Earth. And so what we are here to do on Earth is not to go and save Earth, or I mean, we could, but it's not being Mother Teresa, or I don't know, we have this impression is, what makes me feel achieved, what makes me feel energized, What brings me this little pinch in the heart that all of a sudden I feel like I'm $1 million babe? I know for myself, for example, one of the things that I really love, and it was the case throughout my investment banking years, was to talk to people. I love that. I love being in a relationship with people, understanding, helping them helping me. I like that. And I think that we each of us have something, and many somethings that make us feel motivated, that get us out of bed in the morning. So I would say start by finding what this is. And it's not necessarily job related. Sometimes, I used to have a cat, and it was the cat who was getting me out of bed. And as much as I was upset because I didn't want to, yet, you get up and you pet the cat and it makes you feel good. So let's start by finding what brings us joy, what brings us a form of fulfillment, what brings us a form of, I like where I am right now. So not everything is going to be likable or enjoyable, but there are things that make you feel good about yourself. So start by that. And the second part is, very quickly, you will start seeing a pattern in what actually makes you feel achieved, or what makes you feel happy. So for a lot of the people that I work with, for example, they like projects at work. They like to have a mission. And so the idea is, how can we make this mission more enjoyable and a win-win for everyone? How can you bring your inner leadership so that you feel you are in control to the extent possible, and you feel that you're helping everybody to evolve and to grow at the same time as you are evolving and growing? And these are ways where we can reconciliate body, mind, and soul when we feel we are expanding, when we feel we are growing, when we feel that, I'm going back to earlier, we're making choices out of self-respect, out of expansion, out of intention of growing, of being better, or whatever we decide, rather than, and we're going to make some of them, but not all of it, out of fear. And certainly not out of fear of the other person. So we can still make decisions because we live in places where we need to survive, but surviving does not necessarily mean seeing the other person as systematically the enemy and the person to beat, and it's either you're with me or you're against me or stuff like that. Is sometimes just ignoring the other person and going back into what is, as you said, your values. What is important for me? What is it that I would like to accomplish at the end of the day? And it doesn't mean necessarily accomplishing something physical. Sometimes I would like today to find ways where I can respond to a person without getting upset. That is an accomplishment sometimes, especially with certain people. But what can I do today so that I feel I'm a better person than when I woke up, according to my definition, on my terms, and nobody else's?
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, as we're rounding this up, this is maybe a good place to stop, about like just, finding something to enjoy every day and to feel in alignment with your values. What did I do today to effectuate some of those values? And what did I do today to be slightly better than I was yesterday or even this morning? And every day is a new day. And it's according to our own values, not the world's or our parents or our bosses. It's what is it for us today? I just love that. And I've really enjoyed having this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to find out more or work with you?
Mainly on social media. So I'm on LinkedIn, Mayda Poc. I'm also on Instagram, Mayda Poc too. And you can find me as well, Mayda at maydapoccoaching.com. That's my email, or my website, maydapoccoaching.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put those in the show notes as well. And I really want to thank you so much. I mean, this has been an incredible conversation. I have learned so much. And gosh, it's been just such a delight.
It was very well shared as well. And thank you for inviting me. And thank you for opening as well the conversation. It felt very flowy, and it felt very, as well, this is very good.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, if you like this conversation and are looking to align your work and life with your purpose or uncover your purpose in the first place, work with me. I coach people ready to uncover and appreciate their worth, make an impact, and find meaning and purpose in the work they do, whether that's personal or professional work. Get your mind right and make your plan for impact and coach with me. Connect with me for 15 or 20 at the Calendly link in the show notes below and talk about coaching with me. Hey everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.